The window in this room doesn't have a screen. I noticed that the first night. There's a gap at the bottom where the frame doesn't quite meet the sill, and at night you can hear everything. Motorbikes, someone's television 3 doors down, dogs, sometimes rain. It took me about 2 weeks to stop noticing it. Now I think I'd miss it if it were quiet. My name is Gary. I'm 63 years old. I'm from Columbus, Ohio, and I've been living in Rio de Janeiro for going on 3 years now. The room I'm in right now costs me 400 reais a month, which is about $75. It's in a neighborhood called Rocinha. If you've heard of it, you know what that means. If you haven't, it's a favela. One of the largest in South America, they say. I came here with $490,000. I want to say that clearly at the beginning so you understand what this story is actually about. Not a little money, not an inheritance someone might call modest. $490,000. That was my house, my retirement account, 22 years of working extra jobs on weekends, and the settlement from my divorce. My whole life liquidated and wired to a bank account in Brazil. I'm not telling you this because I want sympathy. I'm telling you because I think it's important to be specific. Specific about what I had. Specific about what I did with it. Most people in my situation, and there are more of us than you'd think, they round things down when they talk about it. Like if the number is smaller, the mistake is smaller too. It wasn't smaller, and I knew what I was doing. That's the part I've had to sit with. I want to go back to the beginning, to Columbus. I was an electrician. Commercial work mostly. Office buildings, hospitals, a few schools. Same company for 38 years. I liked it. I was good at it. There's something satisfying about work that has a clear answer. The circuit either works or it doesn't. My marriage didn't have that quality, which is maybe why it took us so long to admit it wasn't working. Linda and I separated in 2019. 24 years. We didn't fight about it, which sounds nice, but actually made it harder in some ways. There was nothing to be angry about. We just looked at each other one Saturday morning and both understood something that had probably been true for a while. She kept the house in the settlement. I got the equity in my retirement accounts. Added together, $490,000. And I was 60 years old, living in a 2-bedroom apartment on Morse Road with a cat that was technically Linda's, but had decided to stay with me. And I had, for the first time in my adult life, an open question in front of me. What do you want to do, Gary? I started watching YouTube. That's how this starts for a lot of us, I think. You fall into these channels, men my age, sometimes older, living in Thailand or Portugal or Mexico, sitting on patios, talking about cost of living, the weather, the food, how far their social security goes, how they feel more alive than they did back home. I must have watched 500 hours of that content over about a year. Brazil kept coming up, Rio specifically. There was one channel where a guy filmed himself walking along Copacabana every morning. Just walking. The ocean on one side, those black and white mosaic sidewalks, people exercising, music somewhere. He talked about how much a nice apartment cost, how good the food was, how the Brazilians were the warmest people he'd ever met. I watched that walk maybe 40 times. I booked a trip in February 2021. 3 weeks. I told myself it was research. I was going to be smart about this. I was going to look before I leaped. The first morning I walked out of my hotel in Flamengo and saw the bay, Guanabara Bay with the hills behind it and the light on the water. I called my daughter in Denver and I said, "Sarah, I think I found it." She said, "Dad, you've been there for 8 hours." I said, "I know." 3 weeks isn't enough time to know a city. I know that now. What 3 weeks is enough time for is to fall in love with a city, which is a completely different thing and considerably more dangerous. I ate at the same churrascaria in Lapa 4 times. I took the tram up to Santa Teresa and walked around for hours. I sat at a little bar in Gloria one afternoon and had 2 cold beers and watched the street and felt, I don't know, permeable. Like I was actually taking things in instead of just moving through them the way I'd been doing in Columbus for the last decade. I went home. I gave the cat to my son in Dayton. I gave notice at my apartment. I hired a relocation consultant I found in an expat Facebook group, a woman who said she specialized in helping Americans transition to Brazil. I paid her $3,500. She sent me a 40-page PDF about visas and neighborhoods and cost of living. It was well formatted. It looked professional. Half of it was accurate. I arrived in Rio de Janeiro on a Thursday in September 2021 with 4 suitcases, a laptop, and $490,000 in a Chase account that I could access from anywhere in the world. The apartment deal I had arranged, a 2-bedroom in Flamengo, $180,000, which was a good price, everybody agreed it was a good price, fell apart 3 weeks before the closing date. The seller's lawyer had been forging documents, not just for me, for multiple buyers. The legal process to recover my $45,000 deposit took 14 months and ultimately returned $0 because the lawyer in question had, by that point, left the country. I want to be clear about something. I had a Brazilian lawyer. I had done research. I had asked questions. I had read the contracts. There are people who will tell you that this kind of thing only happens to people who are careless or arrogant or in a hurry. That's not entirely true. Sometimes it happens to people who did most things right and one thing wrong, and that one wrong thing is enough. I lost $45,000 before I'd been in Rio for a month. So, where were we? Fernanda. We had been seeing each other for about 6 weeks when she first mentioned the business. An import operation. She and her cousin were bringing in electronic components, reselling to retailers in Sao Paulo. She showed me a spreadsheet on her phone. Numbers, suppliers, projected margins. She wasn't asking me for anything. She was just sharing her life with me, the way people do when they're getting close. 3 weeks later, she mentioned a cash flow problem. A supplier in Shenzhen needed payment before they would release a shipment. Her cousin was waiting on a bank transfer that had been delayed. It was $8,000. She would pay me back within 30 days, she said. She had the documentation to show me. I sent $8,000. She paid me back, in 22 days, with a handwritten note that said, I still remember this, I told you 30, it took 22. I don't like to owe people. I want you to understand why that mattered. Because it mattered enormously. It was proof, not of a scam, proof of the opposite. Proof that I had not made a mistake. Proof that my judgment was sound, that the life I was building was real. What I understand now, and I've had a lot of time to think about this, is that the repayment was part of the investment. You repay the small ones so the larger ones feel safe. Over the next 14 months, I transferred money to Fernanda's accounts 11 times. $8,000 for the supplier, $22,000 for a warehouse deposit, $15,000 for her mother's surgery, a real surgery, I believe, because I met her mother twice, $34,000 for a shipment held up in customs and accruing fees daily, $28,000 for a licensing issue that her lawyer said needed to be resolved in cash, $18,000 for, I don't remember exactly. I have a spreadsheet. I made a spreadsheet because I thought keeping records was responsible. The total was $180,000. The day I asked to see the office, the physical office, the warehouse, the operation I had been funding for over a year, she told me she was busy, that this week was difficult, that next week would be better. Next week I texted and got no response. The week after that I went to her hotel. They told me she had left the position 2 months earlier. I sat on a bench in the Terra do Flamengo for about 3 hours that afternoon. It was a Tuesday. The kite surfers were out. Some kids were playing soccer near the water. Everything was the same as it always was, which I still find, very strange. When something that large happens inside you, It's strange that the world doesn't register it. I went to the police. I filed a report. The officer was professional and thorough and explained without unkindness that cases of this nature were extremely difficult to prosecute, that recovery of funds in wire transfer fraud was statistically unlikely, and that he had 3 similar reports on his desk from that week alone. I hired a private investigator. He found nothing useful and charged me $4,000. I went back to the apartment and tried to do the math. $490,000 to start. $45,000, the Flamengo apartment deposit, gone. $180,000, Fernanda, gone. $3,500 for the relocation consultant, $4,000 for the investigator, rent, food, transport, language classes, a medical bill, another $90,000 more or less over 2.5 years of living. That left me approximately $167,500. That's still money, I know that. $167,000 is still money. But I had no income. My Social Security wouldn't start for another 18 months. I had a visa situation that needed a lawyer to untangle, and I had, this is harder to explain, a kind of paralysis that I don't have a better word for. Like the part of me that made decisions had simply used itself up. I made 2 more bad decisions in the following 8 months. A business arrangement that didn't work. A loan to someone I had convinced myself I could trust. Another $90,000, gone in ways that were entirely my own fault. By month 34, I had $7,000, a cough that had been with me since winter, and a visa that had expired 4 months earlier. I called my daughter. It was a Sunday. She lives in Denver. She has 2 kids. She works in hospital administration. When she picked up the phone and heard my voice, she knew immediately that something was wrong. And she asked me, "Dad, what happened?" And I couldn't say it yet. I said I was fine. I said I was just checking in. I hung up, and I sat in that apartment in Santa Teresa, and I understood for the first time that I was not going to be able to fix this. That there was no version of events in which Gary Mitchell at 63 was going to rebuild $490,000 in Brazil. That this was not a setback. This was the outcome. There's a specific kind of grief that comes with that, different from other grief. It's not loud. It doesn't come all at once. It's more like you had a picture of yourself, a picture you'd been carrying for 60 years, and you look at it one day and understand that the picture is wrong. I moved out of Santa Teresa in January. A Brazilian man I'd met at a language school, genuinely kind, one of the genuinely kind people I met in Rio, he knew someone in Rocinha who rented rooms. Clean, cheap, no questions about my visa situation. That's where I am now. The room costs $75 a month. I eat simply. My Social Security started 4 months ago, $1,340 a month, which in this room, in this neighborhood, is enough to live on. Barely, but enough. My daughter knows now. I told her last spring. She cried, which I hadn't expected. She offered to buy me a ticket home. I told her not yet. I don't know why I said not yet. I'm still trying to figure that out. I think I'm not finished with Rio. Not in the way I imagined when I came, but there's something here that I'm still trying to understand. About what I wanted. About why I wanted it. About what a 60-year-old man was actually looking for when he watched those YouTube videos and thought, "That's it, that's the life. I just have to be brave enough to take it." I wasn't wrong that something was missing. I was wrong about what it was. And I was wrong about where to look for it. But that original feeling, that feeling of standing on the Flamengo waterfront on my first morning here, looking at the bay, thinking, something can still happen. I don't know what to do with that feeling. It's still there. That's the part I can't quite explain. The window in this room doesn't have a screen. At night, you can hear everything. I've stopped minding.